Thor's back. Check it, yo.
Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Sean Dove, a motion designer from Melbourne, Australia, and today we're going to take a look at another Cinema 4D quick tip. In this one, we're going to get back to basics. We'll set up a simple keyframe animation and then take advantage of deformers to enhance it, creating some nice anticipation and fluid motion, and then we'll get it ready to render out. All right, let's take a look at what we're going to create, and then we'll jump straight in.
Run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage. I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling. Phone and progression, it's all that I wanted. The phone and affection, I summon and dub it. Cause bitch, I got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems. I solve them. I run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage. I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling. Phone and progression, it's all that I wanted. The phone and affection, I summon and dub it. Cause bitch, I got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems. I solve them.
Alright, so this is the little animation that we're going to try and have a bit of a play with today setting up. The idea is that we'll define a bit of a texture at the start, then we'll jump into cinema, we'll set up the shape, give it some keyframes for some basic animation. We're going to enhance that using Cinema 4D's deformers, and then of course let's render this bad boy out. Alright, let's jump in, we'll start having a bit of a play. Alright, first up, I'm starting in Photoshop. I'm going to set up a new little document here. And what we need to do first up is define our text. In the little example you just saw, I had dope plastered on the side of a cube. So I think let's just have a crack at setting up that exact same setup. So I'm in Photoshop and I'm just going to select something. Just going to select a slightly different font. Giorgio Sans always sits nicely with me, especially throwing that into italic. Look at that. Already looking like we're good to go. I'm just going to center that up in my frame and scale it up. My artboard here is 1920 by 1080. I'm not being too precious to fill it. I'm just making sure our text is nice and big. All right, hitting C on my keyboard to bring up my crop tools. And what we want to do is crop in our canvas so we're far tighter on our text. Holding down Alt or Option at the same time while pulling on the opposite end. We'll scale them in uniformly. This top one might just need to come down a little bit. So what I'm trying to do here is just create a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a stroke around our text. Do the same with the sides. Let's pull them in. Once we're happy, hit enter, and something like that looks pretty good. All right, now what we can do, let's save this. We'll call this our dope texture. We can leave that as a PSD. That's absolutely fine. Nice, so we've now got our texture that's going to be on the side of our cube, but just to help make sure that we're not going to skew our text, when we applied this to the side of our cube, let's just come up and have a look at our canvas size. What I like to do is just change that into pixels, and what this is going to do is give us some width and height dimensions, and we'll use that as a bit of a rough guide to setting up our cube. All right, now that we've got that, let's jump over into Cinema. I'm going to set up a new document and just grab ourselves a trusty cube. Now, if I jump back into Photoshop for a second, you can see the width of our canvas is 1344 pixels with a height of 588. So let's use these to set up our cube. So first up, 1344. Now, let's grab our X, let's scale that out a little bit, and we can see that's our width. That's the width of our cube, and this is the one that we're going to want to go 1344. We can then tab down into our Y, jump back into Photoshop if you want to double check the height, and it was 588. So let's go 588, and I'm going to give that same dimension to our Z width as well. With a cube select, I'm just going to hit S to scale that back up into our frame. And as I move around this now, you can see we've still got that nice, square edge. So this is a perfect little rectangle. Beautiful. Just going to drop another cube into our scene so we can get a bit of a sense of just the generic scale that a cube comes in at. We're not going to need this nearly as big. So now that we've set it up at the right ratio, now let's scale it back down to a more manageable size. Setting T on my keyboard to bring up the scale tool. Let's just scale this down. Not being too precious. Look at around 40%. That's going to be perfect. We can then delete that other little reference cube. And let's frame up our main cube. If I hit NB on our keyboard, you're going to see we've got very little geometry at the moment. So let's just give this a little bit more. So our X height, this is our longest edge. So I'm going to give this a few more segments. Let's go 15 and 10 in both the X and Y. In both the Y and Z, sorry. And actually in this X, I might increase that a little bit. Something so we're a bit more uniform. Looks like 20, that's perfect. All right. Down in our texture field here, double click. Let's bring up a new texture. Let's rename this. This is our dope. Let's jump into it. And what I'd like to do here, let's come down to our alpha. Let's enable that. Click on the three little dots here and let's navigate to where we saved our little image texture. So with that selected, I'm going to open it. No, I don't need to create a copy, and that's perfect. Let's throw that texture onto our cube for a second. And the reason we've applied this in the alpha is now this is masking wherever our black text is on the cube. When this texture is applied to our cube, you can see it perfectly fits that face. It perfectly fits the face of our cube that we've set. And that's why it's important to try and set your cube up to the exact same size that you've set your artboard up for your reference text. And what this allows us to do now is grab a second texture. I'll just darken this off a little bit and I'll apply this to our cube also. And let's make sure our dope texture is on top. And what we're going to get now is that text showing back through thanks to that other texture. And why this is good is now we can add some reflection or just have a bit more of a play with that new underneath texture, which we might do in a few moments. All right, nice. I'm going to drop a camera into our scene here, and we want to be looking perfectly at this front face. So let's look through our camera. I'm just going to zero out its rotation. Grab our cube, hit S in the viewport to frame it up. Reselect our camera, and you can see our rotation is completely zeroed out. So now we can just zoom out a little bit. Frame that up in the center. Perfect. You're going to come up to tags, Cinema 4D tags, and just add a protection to our camera just so we can stay locked into this position. Now in the reference animation, it was kept very simple, and that's exactly what we're going to try and do here. We're going to do some simple keyframe animation and then just enhance it using some of the deformers that Cinema 4D offers. I'm going to save this for now. Great, so now we're almost set up and ready to go. Great, so now we're pretty much set up to start animating this little cube. So with it selected, I'm going to jump into our coordinates. We want to create this little spin. We want to create this little spin reveal into the next face. So let's grab our cube. I'm going to hit R on our keyboard to bring up our rotation tools. And with our cube selected, I'm just going to rotate a little bit because this is the direction we need it to go. And you can see in our coordinates here, it's actually our pitch that's rotating. So I'm just going to zero that out for a second and add a keyframe just to that pitch parameter. Now, before it does spin, I want to build up a bit of that anticipation that we're going to be using the deformers for. But for now, we're just focusing on this actual rotation. So I'm going to add another keyframe to pitch at 10 frames in. And all that's going to do is just hold that for that initial 10 frames for us. Now, my document at the moment is set up by default at 30 frames a second. So we're going to come all the way to 30 frames. That's 1 second in our animation. And let's just rotate this minus 90 and add another keyframe. All right, let's watch that back. Holds for 10 frames and then rotates between frame 10 and frame 30. Not looking all that flash at the moment, but we've got that initial spin for us to have a bit of a play with. All right, so now we want to build in that anticipation. So I'm going to come up to our deformers here, and I'm going to grab ourselves a twist deformer. Let's grab that and make it a child of our cube. With our twist selected, come over to its object tab, and we're just going to hit fit to parent. And now as I start to increase this angle, you can see it's fitting the size of our shape, but it's not twisting the right way for us. So let's grab our twist and we just need to rotate this around. In this case, I'm just going to need to rotate it 90 degrees, re-hit fit to parent. And now you can see we're getting this great twist happening within this cube. So I'm going to zero out its angle and add a keyframe at frame 0. All right, now let's scrub forward. I'm going to go to frame 10, which is the exact spot that our cube starts spinning from. And now I'm just going to increase our angle in the opposite direction that our cube is actually spinning. So I'm going to go 90 degrees. Now as I scrub back through these frames, you can see we just get that little bit of anticipation as it whips back around. But now we need it to ultimately rest and resolve clear with our dope center in the frame there. So let's come to frame 30, and I'm just going to zero out our angle and add another keyframe. Now let's scrub through this. That's not looking too bad. There's a few little pacing things that we could try and fix up there, which we'll do in just a moment, I'm thinking. But already that's starting to feel more interesting, having that little bit of a whip right at the start. All right, let's grab our cube. I'm going to come into our F-curve timeline. Now with just the cube selected, you can see here, if I zoom out a little bit, these three keyframes are our 0 to 30. We can see we hold from 0 to 10 and then slowly easy ease between those next two keyframes. What I'm thinking is I wouldn't mind it whipping around a little bit quicker and then easing into its final position. Let's grab our keyframe at frame 30, and I'm just going to stretch that Bezier handle. And what this is going to do is allow us to get into that position far quicker, and it'll ease into that final position. That's not too bad. We could potentially pull that back a little bit closer, make that. I'm not actually loving that animation. I'm going to undo that a couple of times to remove that handle. If we grab our keyframe at frame 10 instead, hold shift. I'm just going to increase our handle a little bit there. Let's have a look at that. I might need to actually do both of these handles. Let's just tidy that up a little bit. It's not feeling too bad. All right. This is starting to look not too bad. We've got that initial little spin. And now what we want is we're going to hold this for a moment, and then we want to push it towards our camera. So at frame 30 there, we're fully resolved. So at frame 30, I think what we're going to do is kick this off again from frame 60. That'll be 1 second of hold in between these two little moves we're setting up with the cube. So let's grab our cube. In this case, I'm going to hit E to bring up our move tool. Might find it easier to jump into your 4 views for a moment. We're going to be animating the Z position. All right. So at frame 60, let's add a keyframe. Let's do the exact same little setup we did before. 10 frames in, let's add a hold keyframe. And then at frame 90, I'm going to push it towards our camera, maybe something like minus 300. Might be a little bit close. Let's go minus 250. Add a keyframe. Scrub through. Beautiful. Just going to add a few more keyframes to our timeline here for us to keep playing with. So just as we created anticipation for our spin, we now want to build in some anticipation for this push towards the camera. Let's go to frame 60. So we've got our cube. This time I'm going to grab ourselves a bend. Let's grab that. I'm going to put it beneath our twist, but as a child to our cube and not the twist. So you can see when I drop that in, this is now just affecting the cube. And we're building up a bit of a stack of these deformers. Let's jump into the object tab of our bend, hit fit to parent, and let's just increase our strength. Let's see which way is this bending. Now we can see it's certainly bending our geometry, but not in the way we want it to. We want this to bend backwards. We want to get that little bit of a whip happening as it pushes towards us again. So with our bend selected, let's just rotate this around so it's facing the right orientation. So look at that, a couple of rotations. And now we're able to bend this geometry. I'm going to enable keep y-axis length. And this will ensure that it doesn't stretch beyond the parameters that we've set. So let's zero out its strength. And frame 60, that's where we've set the keyframe on our cube to set that initial hold frame. So let's go into our bend and add a keyframe at the strength at 0%. Let's move to frame 70. And I'm just going to push this back a little bit. I don't want to distort it too much. It looks like about 75 degrees. That's looking really good. Keyframe the strength. And as we come forward to 90, let's zero that out. Add another keyframe. Let's just watch these first 90 frames back. So we get that little bit of a spin in the cube. We get the anticipation from the twist and the bend. And I think what we're going to need is just for that to feel like it whips forward a little bit quicker. So let's grab our cube, jump back into our F curve. Just using the number 2 to zoom out and the 1 to move across. So let's grab that keyframe at frame 70. I'm holding shift just to grab the 1 handle. Let's move that across a little bit. How does that look? We might need it. Let's do the same with our bend. So now we've got that little bit of a delay as it sort of whips into that final spot. Whoom. Bend, push. All right, this is starting to feel kind of cool. All right, this is starting to feel kind of cool. We just got the couple of deformers. All right, so now we're going to go another second further. Let's just add a few more keyframes here. Let's add a few more keyframes to our timeline. Jump into our cube. So at frame 90 is where we've pushed it forward here. Let's hold for another second. So that's going to bring us to 120. Now rather than animating the position, I thought let's just grab another one of these deformers and have a bit of a play. The one that I think always creates a really cool look and actually kind of get this inflated sort of finish is the Spherify. So let's grab that bad boy and we'll throw that underneath our bend as a child to the cube as well. Let's hit fit to parent. I'm just going to pull our strength down to 0. Add a keyframe at 0 strength at frame 120. And let's just go 10 frames forward. Let's give this something like, let's go a little bit further. Let's go something like 60%. Now, of course, we could push this all the way and we'll get a perfect circle. But I'm just going to leave it somewhere around 60%. We get these nice little, still some reference to our cube there. We'll add a keyframe. We'll add a keyframe at frame 130. Now let's just scrub through our timeline here. So I want to hold on our Spherify here for another second. So let's go 140, 150, 160. There's our 30 frames. Keyframe at strength at 60. Let's give ourselves another 10 frames and we'll just pull that back down to 0. All right, let's watch this back. We've got our spin and the twist, that push forward with the bend, now that Spherify, and it deflates itself. You can see we had a little bit of a jump between the start and the end there. We want to create a nice little seamless loop here. And the reason for that is we've pushed our cube forward in frame, but we really need to push it back to end up at that final position. So let's jump into our coordinates. And we know that between frame 160 and 170 is where we're removing our Spherify. We're pulling back on that strength. So let's do the same thing with our position. Let's go to 160. I'm going to add a keyframe to our Z position at -250. Go forward 10 frames. I'm just going to zero that out. Hit a keyframe. Now you can see at both the start and the finish. Our position on that Z axis is 0. So that's perfect. We're now starting and finishing at the exact same spot. let's have a play and just have a quick look. Make sure that we're sort of happy with the movement we're getting so far. Now, at any point, we can come in and tweak these keyframes. Maybe we want to just shift that bend along a little bit so it doesn't animate along perfectly with the cube. All right, nice. This is starting to look pretty good. All right, so now we've got all our keyframes set. What we want to do is just further enhance them a little bit more by using these deformers. And the best way to do that is grab one of these jiggle bad boys. Let's grab that, and we'll again throw that beneath our Spherify as a child to our cube. Let's hit play now and see what we get. We're getting all this great jiggle for free. Might grab that bend. I don't think that looked quite as nice with the jiggle. All right, let's jump into our F curve. I think instead we want to ramp into it a bit further. We actually want to ramp into it a bit quicker. There we go. There we go. All I did was just fix the Bezier curves between our cube pushing towards the camera and that bend whipping it around. So now it just whips into that position, bang, a little bit quicker, and that's looking pretty good. We get this nice shrinking as it blows up and collapses down from that Spherify. Now you don't see it all the time, but just especially when we go for that bend, you might have noticed where it's seeing a little bit of the texture on the side faces of this cube. Now, because of how we've set this cube up, it's not projecting the texture very nicely onto those edges. I'm actually going to go to frame 0 and jump out of my camera for a second, just to remind you guys, it's all stretched. It's stretched on that side face. But what the really fun thing is, all this at the moment is just done on a primitive cube. So at any point we could come in here and manipulate. Just turn the jiggle off before making any changes, as it might not make the updates live in the viewport for you. But at any point we can come in here and completely change the parameters of this cube. And I think that's really powerful. And just give you a heap of control with the flexibility. But what I don't want is this texture applied to these side faces. And because our cube is still a primitive, I'm actually not able to select any of those faces. Just to demonstrate, if I hit C to make that editable, now we can start selecting our faces to make a selection. I'm going to undo that because ultimately I want to keep our cube as a primitive. So a really great way to be able to make selections on a primitive is by using a correction deformer. So let's grab that. I'm going to make this a child of our cube as well and just throw it on top of our twist. And now you can see when I've got our correction selected, it's allowing me to make selections of our cube. I'm going to hit UL to make a loop selection. And I'm just going to make a ring selection just on that very edge loop. I'm going to hit UF to make a fill selection and just fill that edge and just fill that side cap. Let's come up to select and just go set selection. And let's do the same to the other side of our cube here. Just spinning around it. Got our corrections selected. I'm going to deselect that selection tag so we don't override it. Again, hit UL to grab that outside loop. UF to fill the cap. Come up to select and go set selection. Great, so we've now got these two polygon selections. I'm going to grab both of them. Going to grab both of them and throw them onto the cube. Let's now grab our dope texture. Just going to make sure our color is 100% white on it so we're nice and bright. And now just duplicate that, disabling the alpha, and I'm going to drop that onto our cube. That's going to override everything because it's the topmost texture. But now, as I isolate that purely on one of those selection tags, you can now see that cap is perfect white, and that's exactly what we're after. Going to add one more texture. to our cube, just to give it that initial selection as well. So now we can zoom around. We're not going to be getting any of that texture showing up on those side caps or side faces. Now jump into our locked off camera. Let's hit play again and just have another look. We're going to re-enable our jiggle so we can get all that fluid motion back. And great, now whenever we see some of those side faces, we're not going to get any of that distorted text. All right, nice. I think this is looking pretty fun. I'm going to grab a disk and just pull this down beneath our cube. Now scale this up a little bit. And this cube is purely for us to catch some shadows and give us a bit of a ground plane. I want this to feel like a bit of a floating cube, but at the same time, very flat. I might just scale this up a little bit more so we're going off our frame. Let's call this disk ground. And I'll also throw in a background object to our scene as well. Let's make one last texture. Turn off both the color and reflectance, and we'll just worry about the luminance. Throw that onto our background. Using Command, select that texture and duplicating it to our disk. Let's hit render and have a quick look at what we've got. All right, it's looking a little bit flat at the moment, not quite what we're after. We'll jump into our render settings. I'm going to use the physical renderer. Come down to the Objects tab, and I'm going to deselect that default light. Hit render again. All right, we're looking a bit flat. And the reason for that is I didn't want to use global illumination for this render. I wanted it to be nice and quick. So although we've been working in the color channel, I'm going to disable that and enable our luminance channel for both our dope top layer mask and also just those side caps as well. So we really didn't need the extra luminant texture for our background and ground there, but that's all right. Let's hit render again. Perfect. Our text is now showing up nice and crispy. All right, so we've got our ground. We want to get some shadowing happening. Let's jump into our render settings again. Go to our effects tab, and I'm going to include some ambient occlusion. Slide this over a little bit for a second. Hit render, and you can see we're not really getting a heap showing up. It still looks quite flat. All we're really seeing is just that black text showing through on our cube. But if we change our maximum ray length in our ambient occlusion, let's go maybe 600. Hit render again, and look at that. We're now starting to see some of that. Shadowing showing up in our actual image. All right, it's a little bit noisy at the moment. But what we could do is come over to our sampler. If we change that to something like high, this is of course going to increase the render time, but you're going to get a far cleaner image. So we might want to just turn that up for that final render. So for now, we'll keep playing with medium, and that gives us some pretty fast feedback. And what I love about this is because we've increased that maximum ray length, we get some shadowing running up the face of our cube, but by the time we sort of get to the top, we're bleeding off into the background again, and I just think this makes for a really, really great look. So it was a really simple setup. We grabbed our cube, we animated its rotation, its position, and then just enhanced it by animating deformers around it, using just a disk and that background to form ourselves a bit of a floating limitless world, and then just by increasing that ray length on that ambient occlusion, that's how we're able to add back in those shadows and create something that feels really quite unique and tactile at the same time. You feel like you could reach out and touch this thing, and you can see we're rendering this and we're spitting out these frames in 4 seconds. I think that's really great. So once I'd rendered this out, took it over into After Effects, synced it up with a bit of a track, and then if you like that little black look, I threw that into After Effects as well. It's the same clip, just with a little invert on it. All right, so that's great. We've got this great little looping animation, 200 frames, that jiggle deformer, really just as that base layer, enhancing all the other ones, and then those correction deformers to be able to make selections on primitive objects. I think that's a really powerful thing. So hopefully you've been able to take away something from this one. Just a bit of a beginner's tip to jump in and start using deformers to enhance your keyframe animation. All right, thanks guys. I'll see you again soon. Cheers.
Thor's back. If you want to see more of the God of Render in 2020, don't forget to like and subscribe. A cheeky comment wouldn't hurt either. Even your local superhero needs a bit of an ego boost.
Run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage. I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling. Phone and progression, it's all that I wanted. The phone and affection, I summon and dub it. Cause bitch, I got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems. I solve them. I run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage. I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling. Phone and progression, it's all that I wanted. The phone and affection, I summon and dub it. Cause bitch, I got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems. I solve them.